The silence in the studio hallway was unsettling. Normally buzzing with the shuffle of assistants and the echo of calls being taken, it was dead now. Behind one soundproof door, a phone vibrated 3 times in a row urgent. The man sitting behind the desk didn't reach for it. He already knew what the messages were about. Something had leaked. Again, and this time. It wasn't a rumor that could be waved off or buried with press releases and soft interviews. No, this one came with names, loud names. Names with reach. Across social media platforms, a fire was spreading. Fast, a clip had surfaced raw unfiltered. In it, a voice that commanded attention even in chaos was laying it out. Accusations. Timelines, veiled threats, and worst of all, receipts. It wasn't random. It wasn't vague. It was direct, intentional, and completely out of the control of the usual PR spin cycle. And the man at the center of it, he hadn't seen this coming. What made it worse was who was behind the mic. Just one person. One known for calling out hypocrisy with surgical precision. The other, a walking flame torch who never apologized and never missed. Together, they had pulled back a curtain that had been bolted shut for years. Now the entire production was being dragged into daylight. Calls were made quickly. Lawyers, crisis managers, former allies. But too many people had already seen. It was trending in over 12 cities before the man even got out of his chair. The hashtag wasn't even subtle. It hit like a punchline, but the laughter was bitter, cruel, and growing. His silence was no longer strategy, it was an admission. And they were using every second of it. Outside the walls of the studio lot, other voices were joining in. Quiet. Ones who had been silent for years. Crew members, staff, anonymous posts started surfacing with quotes, alleged text exchanges, contract screenshots. At first, they seemed unverified. But then someone confirmed one. Then 2, then a producer. Then a casting director. And the illusion of total control cracked, not shattered, but cracked. The kind of crack that lets the flood in. The panic wasn't about reputation alone. It was about leverage. The kind of leverage that had been protected for years by fear, favors, and NDAs. But now, someone had found a way around the gag orders. Someone had linked the right breadcrumbs together. Someone who knew the power of story and was using it against the very person who built an empire on crafting them. The internal crisis team met in silence. No jokes, no smiles, no scripts. Just questions they couldn't answer fast enough. Who had leaked the financials? Why did that one actor suddenly untag the studio from everything? Why was that foundation filing being passed around on Reddit? And most importantly, who's next to speak? Because if 2 voices could unravel this much in one night, what would happen if more joined in? The man behind the empire sat alone in the dark, not writing, not plotting, just watching. Because the cameras weren't in his control anymore, and this time, he was the one being written into a story. The next morning, the air was thicker than usual on the lot. Security doubled. Not for safety, but for optics. The last time panic had struck this hard was during a casting scandal nearly buried a decade ago. But this wasn't the same. That time, there were plausible denials. Media partners willing to reframe the narrative and an eager audience, still enchanted by the myth. This time, the myth itself was under siege. A black SUV pulled up to the side entrance, windows tinted, moving like a hearse. No cameras, no waves, just quiet urgency. Inside sat one of the highest paid advisors in the entertainment world, flown in overnight. He wasn't here to draft statements or build sympathy. He was here to protect the brand or what was left of it. "We can't stop the video," he said without introduction. "It's everywhere. And more importantly, it feels true." People believe it because they want to. The word true hung in the air like smoke. No one responded. Down the hall, in a sound booth that used to echo with laughter and rehearsals, A team watched the full clip again frame by frame, expression by expression. The cadence, the body language, the crowd reaction. The speaker had timed it perfectly. No slander, no wild claims, just surgical language. Like a scalpel, each sentence cut with precision. It wasn't rage. It was strategy. In one section, the speaker referred to a mansion built on broken promises, and the audience had gasped. Not because it was poetic, because it was familiar. Too many former employees, collaborators, and aspiring actors had whispered the same thing in private, and then came the final blow, the audio leak. Not staged, not edited. Just raw mic audio from what sounded like a heated conversation backstage. A voice that clearly matched the one everyone knew, snapping at a crew member over something trivial, belittling, cruel, dismissive. The kind of moment that rarely escapes the walls of production. But now it was in the hands of the public, and it carried weight. The phone in the room buzzed. The advisor checked it, exhaled through his nose, and slid it across the table. Another name had just gone live, not anonymous, verified. A respected actress who had once credited the studio for her breakout role. Her tweet was simple, pinned, and brutal. We weren't seen. We were used. Within minutes, it had over 40,000 shares. By noon, 5 more entertainers had reposted it. Some added captions, others left it hanging, silent agreement, louder than words. In response, panic gripped the executive floor. Not just because of who was speaking now, but because of who was still silent. There were whispers that a certain screenwriter was preparing a thread. A former casting assistant had gone dark on socials, a sign that they were either preparing something or being silenced. And every silence now felt like a countdown. Suddenly, the empire didn't feel so impenetrable. It felt hollow, like a stage set. It's polished from the outside, but fragile from within. The PR team offered 3 statement drafts. One was apologetic, one defensive, one deflective. All were rejected because he knew none of them could compete. With the voices rising now, not when truth wasn't in the press release, but in the lived experience of the people speaking out. Backstage, an intern quietly deleted a folder marked VIP Talent Relations. It had been sitting untouched for 2 years. No one stopped him. Outside, fans gathered at the gates. Not with signs of support, but with signs of warning. They weren't waiting to be inspired anymore. They were waiting to watch the tower fall. The studio cafeteria, once bustling with early morning table reads and coffee-fueled script sessions, had gone eerily quiet. Chairs were stacked, the espresso machine was off, and the laughter, that signature buzz that once made this place feel like more than just a business, had vanished. Even those who stayed spoke in whispers, glancing over shoulders like they were in someone else's house. Because in a way they were. The walls didn't belong to them anymore. They belonged to the story unraveling in real time online. The headlines changed every hour. Powerful voices break their silence. Hollywood's safe spaces are cracking. When empires collapse, the fall is loud. The media, always cautious around this particular name, had suddenly lost its hesitance. No more curated spotlights. No more smiling magazine covers. Wasn't PR friendly anymore. It was open season. Meanwhile, across the country, second voice went live. Calm, deliberate. Someone who hadn't spoken publicly in years. The video wasn't flashy. It's just a dimly lit room, a hoodie, and a man staring directly into the camera. He didn't name names. He didn't have to. Only asked one question. What happens when the storyteller becomes the villain in his own script? The internet exploded. Duets, reactions, breakdowns. People pulled receipts going back 10 years, contracts, interviews, awkward exchanges, side eyes on red carpets. Suddenly, moments that once passed as awkward or tense were now being framed as evidence. Every silence, every smirk, every no comment. It all looked different now under the weight of this new context. Inside the executive suite, A legal team was reviewing NDAs. They weren't asking who could be silenced. They were asking who couldn't. And the list was longer than expected. Former collaborators who had been paid out quietly. Others who had walked away. No drama, no headlines until now. Some of them had kept receipts. One even had video. No one knew how much had already been shared or what was coming next. The fear wasn't about lawsuits anymore. It was about timing. The strategist leaned forward, voice cold. You don't have a PR problem. You have a pattern, and the public knows the difference now. A silence fell over the room. That word pattern was the death sentence. Because one bad moment could be forgiven, even two. But a pattern becomes identity. A fresh headline. Dropped anonymous sources detailed toxic culture at famed studio. It wasn't TMZ, it was The Atlantic. That meant deeper research. That meant sources were talking. That meant the gloves were off. Back in the production warehouse, two grips were overheard talking about their exit strategy. If he folds, all of it folds. It's not just his name on the wall. It's a name on every deal we signed. Another added, I just don't want to be in the building the day someone drops the video. 'Cause rumors said someone had one. A video from an old retreat. Private. Until now. The building began to feel haunted not by ghosts, but by truths. Ones that had been swallowed for years. Covered up with favors, funding, and fear. And now, they were standing outside, banging. On the doors, the empire had always been built on the idea of control. Control of the story, control of the cast. Control of the narrative. But no one controlled this story anymore. It was writing itself now. And the world was reading every word, that evening. The glow of the city outside the studio gates didn't bring any comfort. In fact, it made things worse. Because the lights, the very ones that once symbolized success now reflected eyes. Watching, waiting, recording. People weren't just consuming the scandal, they were participating in it. Threads were being compiled with obsessive precision. TikToks were syncing audio clips to timelines. And ex-employees were suddenly getting anonymous DMs asking, is this true? Or worse, do you have proof? Inside the war room, the inner circle had gathered again, but the energy was different. No raised voices, no strategies being pitched. Just the cold realization that no amount of spin could outpace a truth people were already choosing to believe. And they weren't waiting for facts anymore. They had emotion. They had momentum. They had anger. The screen on the far wall showed a split feed. Half of it was live coverage from an entertainment outlet dissecting the accusations frame by frame. The other half was a growing stream of comments from people who said they always knew. People who had seen glimpses, heard whispers, been warned on, now felt validated. At one point, an intern stood at the back of the room and quietly asked, should we take the website offline? No one answered because offline meant surrender. It meant admitting the machine wasn't running anymore. And they weren't ready to say that out loud, not yet. But outside, the surrender was already visible. A well-known actor who once called the studio home removed every photo connected to it from her social media. An executive producer changed his bio to something vague. And one prominent playwright posted, a single line, they tell you it's a family until you ask for freedom. That post got 500,000 likes in 6 hours. Meanwhile, the original two voices that started the storm. They'd gone quiet. No follow-ups, no interviews. Just silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than words. 'Cause the goal was never to drag, was to expose. And once that seed was planted, they knew they didn't have to do anything else. The garden would grow on its own. Backstage, a line producer confided to another that she was afraid. Not for her job, but for her name. People are already looking. Up credits, she said. They're building lists of who was around. They're saying if you stayed quiet, you're complicit. That fear the guilt by association had never been real before. But now, it was crawling up the walls like smoke. A formal statement was finally drafted. It was soft, vague, heavy on values, and light on substance. But before it could be posted, someone in the room asked the one question that killed it instantly. What if someone drops the footage 5 minutes later? That was the problem. Every move they made now had to be weighed against a hypothetical that could ruin them further. Every silence was seen as guilt, every word as manipulation. There was no winning, only losing more slowly. A security guard who had been at the front desk for 8 years clocked out early and didn't return. He left his badge and a note. 3 sentences written in sharp, heavy letters. We believed in you. We protected you. Never protected us. Upstairs, the man whose name was still etched into the building's stone facade stared out the window, not at the skyline, but at the reflection. And he didn't like what he saw anymore. By the next morning, something had shifted, not just inside the building, but in the city around it. There was a weight in the air, like the weather was holding its breath. The studio lot was quieter than it had ever been, not from lack of people, but from the kind of fear that makes everyone move slower, talk softer, and keep their heads down. Even the keycard scanner at the main gate seemed reluctant to beep. The outside world, however, was not quiet. That morning, a new voice entered the storm. A former child star, long removed from the limelight, had uploaded a 12-minute video simply titled, My Experience. No tags, no branding, just truth. She didn't scream, she didn't accuse. She remembered. And that remembrance, delivered through a quivering voice and tear-glossed eyes, hit harder than any accusation could. She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. The timeline matched. The studio matched. The unspoken silence around her story had always matched. The video hit 1 million views before noon, and suddenly, the dominoes weren't falling, they were collapsing. Production assistants from shows taped a decade ago started sharing group texts and emails. One posted a long thread, time-stamped clips of rehearsals, behind-the-scenes moments. Wardrobe malfunctions no one was supposed to film, but someone always did. Each post, each fragment cracked the armor a little more. The brand that once seemed untouchable now felt bloated, out of sync with the moment. The illusion of perfection had shattered. Inside the main office, there was talk of going dark, temporarily shutting down all studio activity for reflection and restructuring. But even that idea sounded hollow. Restructuring what? A kingdom built entirely in one man's image. The silence in the boardroom wasn't disagreement, it was fear of the truth behind the question. Worse still, the narrative was no longer in their hands. A cultural scholar appeared on a podcast that afternoon, analyzing the scandal not as a celebrity moment, but as a long overdue reckoning. This isn't just about one man, she said. It's about the machinery, the myth, the danger of unchecked reverence in an industry that feeds on image but starves truth. And that quote, those exact words, were turned into a viral TikTok. Tens of thousands of shares, duets, remixes, every syllable weaponized against a man who had once crafted the very language of empowerment. Now, that same language was being used against him. Back in the studio's empty writer's room, a junior staffer found a printed quote taped to the wall. It had been there for years, part of the decor meant to inspire. Tell your story before someone else does. They stared at it for a long time, and then they took it down at the same time. The high-profile celebrities who had long been associated with the brand unfollowed the official accounts. One deleted every behind-the-scenes picture. The other posted a black square with the caption, I was silent for too long. No explanations, no tags. Just that even the diehard defenders, the ones who filled comments with wait for the truth and he did so much good, had started to waver. Some quietly deleted their replies. Others edited them to say, I didn't know it was this deep. Because now it was deeper than anyone expected. And the man who once told the world to own their narrative was facing a story he couldn't direct, rewrite, or RESHOOT. This wasn't a movie. It wasn't a series. There were no editors. No filters, no final cuts, just the truth. And it was rolling, frame by frame. With the whole world watching, the sun set without ceremony that evening, casting a red haze over the studio gates as if the sky itself were echoing the unraveling. From the parking lot to the sound stages, the atmosphere felt post-apocalyptic. Familiar spaces turned foreign. Doors that once buzzed with creative energy now creaked in silence. Most lights were off. A lot, usually alive with movement, stood still. The once proud banners flapping from the poles now looked like relics of a fallen kingdom. People weren't coming to work anymore. They were coming to witness an ending. Across the street, cameras gathered. Not paparazzi this time. Journalists. Independent documentarians, former employees with iPhones. Everyone was documenting what felt like the fall of a myth, one clip at a time. The narrative had metastasized. It wasn't about one voice anymore. It was a chorus. Dozens of threads across platforms, each telling a slightly different story. But all orbiting the same dark core. A legacy built on silencing others while preaching the opposite. The most chilling moment came just after 7 p.m. when an anonymous file drop appeared online. It didn't hit the gossip blogs or celebrity channels first. It showed up on activist accounts, watchdog forums, and industry blacklists. Inside the file, internal emails, production notes, calendar entries, names. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was a loaded vault. The kind of material that makes lawyers lose sleep and agents stop answering calls. One note, in particular, began circulating at breakneck speed. It wasn't sensational, just cold. It detailed a last-minute decision to remove a young writer's credit from an episode they had written entirely. The reason? Not the right face for a public narrative. It's that quote. Just those 7 words set the internet ablaze. In another room, an emergency meeting took place. No agenda, no minutes. Just a gathering of department heads, all equally pale. A question broke the silence. How long can we say nothing? But they already knew the answer. They'd waited too long. In the void, others had spoken for them. And no one was interested in curated apologies anymore. They wanted truth, accountability, names. Some staffers had already jumped ship, deactivating work accounts, scrubbing bios. Few began issuing private apologies through dismissed small acknowledgments of complicity. Others sent emails to HR, finally, putting on record things they'd buried for years. One line read, "I never spoke up, but I knew, and I'm sorry." Meanwhile, inside the once vibrant screening room, the man at the center of it all sat alone. The projector was off, his laptop open, but untouched. On the screen, his own press photo. One he had used for over a decade. Confident smile, clean suit, perfect lighting. But it didn't match the room. It didn't match the moment. It looked like another character, a fiction he no longer recognized. Someone entered quietly, an old producer, one of the few who hadn't fled. They didn't speak. Okay. They just placed a worn-out script on the table and whispered, this was the one that could have told the truth. You buried it, and then they left. No accusations, no screaming. Just disappointment. Because the people who had built the empire with him weren't angry anymore. They were heartbroken. Outside, the hashtags continued. The story spread. Voices multiplied. The silence from the top, once a sign of control, had become its own indictment. This wasn't about scandal anymore. It was about reckoning, and the script. The script was no longer his to write.